Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. And on these weekly mini episodes, we bring you bite-sized ideas for you to snack on.
Like breathing exercises, book reviews. Maybe we'll review some scientific research, or we'll share some wellness and fertility stories from our listeners.
So if you're looking for a tip or a trick related to your fertility and well-being, then you've come to the right place.
Let's dig in. Let's tell how it is and how it could be, how it was, and of course, how it should be.
Wow, you've been practicing a little bit.
Not at all. Salt and Peppa's here. Nope, just Ruby and Ann. Welcome back, everybody. And as you can cringe and guess what we're talking about next, this is part 2 of Let's Talk About Sex.
We just had so much to say from the first episode. We just kept talking to each other that we just couldn't let it go. We had to bring you even more answers to burning questions.
Yes, and you definitely came through. You had a couple questions for us. So we have some listener questions that we're going to address. But first, let's recap what we learned in the last Let's Talk About Sex episode. So last time we talked about how often do you need to have sex to conceive? Do you have to have sex every day during your fertile window? What is the fertile window? How to make it not so much of a job? No more sex homework.
And we talked about your sex position that you were.
Oh, that's right. How can we forget the coital alignment position or the coital alignment technique? But
intimate partner rocking? Did I get it right?
Intimate rocking position.
Intimate rocking
position. Yes. And we talked about pain and sexual dysfunction, and we blamed the 1870s.
Yeah.
And we talked about orgasm and if orgasm matters for fertility. So there's a lot of stuff that we talked about in that episode. But, Ann, do we want to start with questions?
Yeah. So, we had an interesting one where it's always fun when I read a question. I'm like, ooh, I want to know the answer to that. So, Ruby, I would ask, are aphrodisiacs real?
Yes, this was a very interesting question. Thank you, listeners, for sending this one in. I went down a rabbit hole. So I'm thinking we're needing to do a full episode on this because it was fascinating. And of course, there's a bunch.
Anything with food, you're going to find fascinating. So I knew this would be a fun one for you.
Yes. So all the nutrition stuff, I was having way too much fun with this. But I think we need to get an Ayurvedic practitioner or traditional Chinese medicine practitioner to talk to us a little bit more about this, because there are some herbs and things that kept popping up in the literature. And I was like, I don't know what that is, don't know what that does, but it all makes sense. So the answer to that question, are aphrodisiacs real? Probably yes. However, it probably has to do with why we tell you to eat as many whole plants as possible in general. It turns out that heart health and whole body health, actually the same things that help that actually help sexual health too. So, but let's just go through a couple of the more common ones. So oysters, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of people have heard about oysters. This comes from the thought that there's a lot of zinc in them, which is helpful for sperm. And then there's dopamine in oysters. Thought bananas was interesting because it's high in bromelain. And pop quiz, everybody. What else do we find bromelain in?
I should have taken notes of our past episodes. I don't know. Broccoli?
Oh my God, pineapples.
Oh, my bad.
Our very first epised. Okay.
That's why bromelain is so familiar. Yeah, obviously this is not my area. I just eat when you tell me to eat, Ruby. It makes me tired to think about it.
As long as it's a pineapple martini. And
yeah.
That's how you get your bromelain. The other ones that came up, so figs are another one. There's a lot of amino acids, and garlic, although, honestly, you eat a lot of garlic, that probably isn't great for your breath. But all these things, the thing that overlaps a lot with them, aside from the oysters, but a lot of the plant-based things including chocolate, is there's a lot of antioxidants and a lot of anti-inflammatories and flavonoids that probably increase blood flow and are just overall better for vascular health, which is going to be better for your sex drive. I did get on my favorite website, nutritionfacts.org, and there are several very good videos that Dr. Michael Greger puts out about different sexual function in food. Interestingly, one was on apples for female sexual health. And yes, apples are good for female sexual desire.
So keeps the doctor away and keeps you sexually primed. So
yes, but make sure that you eat the peel because the peel has the highest amount of flavonoids.
Okay.
Sweet potato does come up a lot, especially when it comes to sperm health. And it also has a lot of flavonoids and antioxidant properties that can help with ED.
So you could make yourself some sort of like vegan stew with like sweet potatoes and a little pineapple and a little garlic and just put it all in there together. And maybe a side of oysters. I don't think you want the oysters in with it all.
Oh, gross. No, like even before when I wasn't plant-based, I just, they're slimy. Nope. Dr. Greger also brought up onion juice. And I'm like, ooh, onion juice. Yes, nothing sexier than onion juice. Pistachios came up a lot with erectile dysfunction, or nuts in general. Sorry. For sexual health on the sperm side of things. Again, probably related to all of those wonderful whole food, plant-based, powered foods that are great for erectile health, sexual health in general. But very, very fun and interesting to go into. So I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So that is my long question, my abbreviated long question.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of getting someone in to talk more about it from the traditional medicine standpoint too.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that'd be so interesting. All right, the other question that we had from listeners was, is there such thing as a sexual peak, and what age is it at?
Okay, so yeah, I want to take this one because I kind of love questions like this where the answer is basically like whatever you want it to be because everything is such vague terms. And so like, what are you even thinking about for a sexual peak? And that's really the issue, is you can find a study to back up anything that you want to talk about. I mean, I know this is all the time, but when you're back in school, you know, there's like lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So it's all about what you want to use to back up your argument. And so that's kind of why you see different numbers in lots of different places. So if you're going, some people talk about it as being for those with ovaries, that your peak is in sort of those early to mid 20s. And that's because a lot of research is looking at hormone levels and kind of saying, all right, when are you at your peak, you know, estrogen level, all this stuff that like we talk about when we talk about peak fertility. We do see that that is kind of in the 20s. And that's what we have for evolution in terms of, you know, conception and all of that. And so there's kind of this extrapolation that from that, if that's when it's easiest for your genitals to have blood flow and get aroused, and that's where your peak is. But obviously there's a lot more to sexuality than just what your genitals and hormone levels are doing. And so because there's so many other aspects on that psychological side, that's when a lot of research is then instead looking at more of the questionnaire. And so a lot of the numbers that people get tossed around actually go back to the original Kinsey studies on sexuality. And that's where you get this idea that those with penises, it's more of like sexual peak at 18. And then those with ovaries, it's more like in the mid 30s, because they were asking people when they have orgasms. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's really the most accurate assessment of sexual peak, is like, where do you have the most orgasms by self-report to some researcher way back in the day. But that's where that number gets paired around a lot, that it's like, it's 18 for them and 35 for us. It's kind of, that's where a lot of that number came from. But actually, there have been some other more recent studies where they ask people and they find that people in their 40s are reporting having like some of their best sexual, even in their 50s, because for some people in terms of enjoyment of sexuality, it's better when you take away that fertility aspect. All of a sudden, you're not worried about an unintended pregnancy. You're more focused on just the experience and what it brings. And so it is not true that there's this one magic peak and window. If sexuality is important to you, it's something that you're going to explore and enjoy at all different aspects of your life. Although, you know, what you're looking for in the experience certainly probably does vary based on what else is going on in your life in all these different phases.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I also want to cover that this kind of touches on is the sexual function in general, and what are some ways that we can improve sexual function. And unfortunately, on the side of the people with ovaries, there's not a lot of like medical things that we can do, but also there's a lot of medicalizing of sexual dysfunction as well. Like we want a pill for everything in this society right now, and really there's a lot more that goes into it. So it's very interesting. It's not just a yes or no answer.
And it's not just a blood flow issue, because that's one of the problems. The medications that we have to treat ED, the thought is, oh, well, let's just give them. And if you have more blood flow going to the genitals, it should work for everybody. But it doesn't quite work the same way. The process of getting an erection is not quite the same thing as feeling arousal with a clitoris.
Yes, and getting vaginal lubrication and all of those things. So next we're going to go into about how is it possible to choose the sex of your embryo or your growing fetus or your child. There are a lot of theories out there that if you do certain things or time things certain way, that you can control whether your embryo and your baby will be a quote unquote male or female, X chromosome or Y chromosome. Like you can control the sex of your child. So there are a couple docs, different methods out there from the 1970s, I think even before that. So there's Dr. Landrum Shettles and came up with the Shettles method. And then there's also the Billings method, which I always found really funny because I'm from Billings.
Was it from Billings? I know. Is it
I don't think so.
Or is it a place? Okay.
I think it's a person. So it's definitely not from my Billings, Montana. I think I would have known that. So does timing of intercourse, superposition, other extracurricular things increase your odds of having a male or a female child? No, is really the answer. So yeah, that's kind of the answer. So where this comes from, as we had mentioned, biologically, sperm, they carry either an X or a Y chromosome. So that determines the biological sex of the embryo and the baby. So the sperm that has an X chromosome, that is female sex, and Y chromosome is male sex.
So even more crazy when you go back in history, all the kings that got rid of their wives for not giving them male heirs, because the sperm is the one that was determining that.
Your fault, bro. Your fault. So, and if you picture what an X and a Y chromosome look like, they look exactly like that. They look like the letter X and the letter Y. And so that Y chromosome doesn't have that extra little piece on it. It has one less extra piece. So theoretically, they have less weight to them. They have less mass to carry around. So the thought is that the X chromosome weighs a little bit more, and
because it's full of all the good genes. That's right. The Y has the one for ear hair. I remember learning that and being like, that's why you don't get a ton of ear hair.
Oh, no.
But that's why older gentlemen tend to develop a lot of ear.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so that's on the Y, but the X has
ear hair.
Other stuff. Ear hair. Yeah, so, only on the Y.
Learn something new every day. So the X chromosome sperm may move slower, theoretically, because it has more weight. So if wanting to try for a female X chromosome, female sex, then under the Shettles method, you should time sperm exposure before ovulation, preferably 2 days before or longer. Conversely, a sperm carrying Y chromosome is supposedly smaller, lighter, and can move faster. Therefore, they theoretically can win the race. So in this case, I picture the sperm, the Y chromosome sperm being the hair, and the X chromosome sperm being the hair rabbit hair, ear hair. X chromosome being the tortoise. So they're fast and they move really quickly. They theoretically can get to the egg faster. So if trying for male sex, sperm exposure should be timed as close to ovulation as possible. usually the day of the LH surge or the next day. The Billings method also suggests that the X chromosome sperm live longer and are more hardy and can tolerate the different pHs prior to ovulation, whereas the Y chromosome sperm are smaller and more fragile and don't live as long. So if you are wanting a female sex embryo, then you need to time sooner before ovulation because they can last. They're a little hardier. They'll last a little longer, whereas you need to time it a little bit closer to ovulation. However, if you are trying to conceive and it's been, you're seeing a fertility clinic or you're having a hard time getting pregnant, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't do these things.
No, and again, it's really hard for them to even prove anything works because you got a 50-50 shot every single time. And like, I will say just personal experience, back when I worked at the hospital, there were two of the charge nurses who knew each other forever. And one had two girls and really, really wanted a boy. And the other had like, basically like one read the book and like studied everything and was doing everything super carefully and tracking. And like she mentioned it offhand, just a break. Oh, I'm doing this to try and have a boy. And it was like, haha, that's funny. And she's like, oh, maybe we'll try it. The one that barely even like had heard a 5-minute snippet of the conversation, she conceived the boy. The one that followed it religiously conceived her third girl. So it's like, it's really hard to know how much is here. And your prior, again, gender and biological, I mean, this is a whole thing to get into, that our chromosomes do not define how we're going to think of ourselves. And so, the other thing is there is a clinic that has a technique called microsort that tries to use this principle and actually spins the sperm down to try and be able to sort out the sperm that are carrying an X chromosome versus those that carry a Y chromosome. And
chunky, slow sperm over here, fast and tiny sperm over here.
But it's not something that we offer in our clinic because it's really quite damaging for the sperm. You're going through this huge centrifuge. You're ending up with a lower chance of getting pregnant, and you're still not giving yourself any kind of 100% guarantee. Even in their best case data that they show, you're basically shifting the odds a bit. So if they tell you that this is a sample that we think is primarily X, meaning a higher chance of a female, that's giving you more like a 90% shot as opposed to a 50-50, still not 100%. And it's even less if you're trying to sort for Y, only about an 80% chance. And the really funny thing to me, when I heard them speak at a conference, is they're trying to spin this uncertainty as a positive by saying, this shows we're not trying to play God. We're still leaving it up to fate. We're just shifting the odds a little bit in your favor. But again, like, is that really worth putting the sperm through a process that's quite expensive and is going to end up with a lower quality sample and probably decrease your overall success rate? So people read about it online. People do ask about it. That's kind of why we don't do it as part of our clinic, because we feel like the cost and the benefit, especially because, again, there is no guarantee, even if you have the chromosomes that are assigned, that child is going to identify as whatever you have in your mind as being the girl that you've always dreamed of raising. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And just from my own experience, like your child that is your person was, meant to be that person. And it very rarely is exactly how you pictured in your mind. It's different, and they're awesome either way.
Now that's different than testing the chromosomes of an embryo, which can determine the genetic composition in terms of whether an embryo is XX or XY. And so when people are doing an IVF cycle where they've created embryos and they're primarily testing them to make sure they have the correct number of chromosomes, but as part of that counting, you can determine, if you want to have that knowledge, whether it's an XX or an XY. But that's very different than all of these.
Yes, the old wives' tales and things, which I'm going to get into in a second. But my advice, and I think Anne would agree, would be, if you're just starting off and you're not exactly like worried and you want to just have some fun and see if it works, kind of thing. And you're like, well, let's have intercourse 2 days before ovulation, see if it's a X chromosome female embryo.
Yeah, a 50-50 shot that it will be. And that may have nothing to do with your timing.
Good on you. That's fun. Great. Okay. But if, you're trying to conceive and you're struggling, let's do what gives you the best shot of getting pregnant and not worry about the other things.
Definitely. And just like we've talked in our other episodes about like joyful movement and joyful nutrition, like joyful sex should be part of this too. Like you want to remember that you don't want sex to become something that you only do as part of your procreative journey. Like you want to still have time for enjoying each other, times that don't involve ejaculation and chance of pregnancy, just are more about that connection of being together. So
exactly. And just to wrap things up, I had some of my favorite old wives' tales that I researched on what could result in a male embryo versus a female embryo. None of these work. Just, I'm going to preface that, okay? So on the male side of things, so X chromosome, eat more with the person with the egg. So the person holding the egg needs to eat more meat. The redder, the better. Ugh, gross. Okay. And salty snacks, potassium-rich foods like bananas, apricots, and celery. And on the sperm side, drink lots of soda and cola. I don't recommend.
Ew.
Don't recommend. No, 100% do not recommend. And then abstaining from sperm ejaculation a few days before. And then standing up or rear entry position. Sperm producing partner propositions the sex and climaxes first. Okay. And then the egg having partner is to sleep on the left side of the partner having sperm.
Wow. I always sleep on the right side. It's a source of controversy because when we go on vacation and stuff, and they have actually done studies for people with kids, how it's way more common for if you have a mom and a dad, for the mom to be on the door side so that you are the one who is bothered first at nighttime awakenings and getting up. They're like, that goes into gender stereotypes and roles. Yeah, like
totally.
When they've surveyed people, it's like,
I am not. I'm far away from the window.
Good for you.
Yeah. Sorry, Dion. I still get bothered.
Yeah.
Just one kid knows to bother me. One kid bothers Dion primarily. Is interesting. So also, if you are exposed to sperm at the quarter moon, or are exposed to sperm at night or on odd days of the month. And if the vagina
I like that phrasing, like sperm is just sneaking out and exposing itself to you. Like, who knows where it came from? If you happen to be illegal. Exposed to sperm during the quarter moon. So.
It sounds like a ritual.
Yeah, it does.
Vagina having partners, head needs to be pointed towards the north. So that even makes it more ritualistic.
Oh my gosh, now I need a compass and my stopwatch and everything else. I think maybe just relax and have sex every now and then and see what happens. But don't, I didn't tell you to relax. Telling people to relax is terrible. I'm sorry. No. I shouldn't say that way.
Warm up those testicles. That's what it says too. And then for female embryo, fish, veggies, sweets and chocolate, magnesium-rich foods, nuts, soybeans, and leafy greens. However,
I like that one a little better than the soda, but
right? But however, I'm sorry, but bananas have magnesium in them too. So okay.
It's almost like this is well thought out.
It's almost like this isn't rooted in science. Missionary, or the vagina having partner on top, or vagina having partner initiates sex and orgasms before partner. Full moon, afternoon delight, even days of the month.
You're going to have to write this down for me, Ruby. I can't remember all the things we're supposed to be doing.
It's a lot. Cool down those testicles, and boxers or sans undies. And whoever is dominant in the relationship at the time of conception will determine the sex. Let me tell you what, I am absolutely the dominant one in the relationship, and I have 2 boys. And then always the good old-fashioned Chinese gender chart.
Yes.
So, anyway, that was fun.
That was fun. Lots of info to laugh at, but mostly ignore. So
hopefully this lightened your day up and can bring sex back to the fun side of life for a little bit.
So now you know everything, right? Everything you need to know about sex and fertility, and probably more than you thought you needed to know in terms of what people have said in the past.
I think we need to do a country tour and do sex ed for everybody, but that's just me.
That's true. We didn't even get into kind of cross-cultural beliefs about sexual practices. That's a whole nother thing. But we hope this was helpful. We hope we kind of made people feel a little bit more understanding about the process and about what matters. But also, I think the main take home is how many things don't matter and how, although there are a lot of factors that can make it challenging to get pregnant, there are a lot of factors kind of guiding you towards that as well too. And that you don't need to get too into the little details about many things that, although people who are well-meaning may be giving you advice about, are probably not likely to actually make a difference in your chances of getting pregnant.
But if you want to have sex on a full moon, go for it.
Yep. Just do the, I still can't say it, intimate partner rocking?
Yes. No. Oh God.
No. It's your technique.
I know. I can't even remember my own sexual position. Oh my gosh. Intimate rocking position.
Intimate rocking position. IRP. Okay, IRP. So yeah, go have some IRP and send us your questions, and we're glad to do one of these again.
Okay. Peace.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.